Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight. My name is Dana Hodel. I'm the Executive Director of Chamber Project St. Louis, and we're so excited to be here with you tonight to share our program with you. For those of you who are new to Chamber Project concerts, we do things a little bit differently. We don't have written program notes. We love to tell a story during our program, so I will be introducing all of the pieces as we go, united under this theme of retold, listening forward to history. One of the things I love about being a musician, I play the clarinet, I'm not playing tonight, but I am a musician, is I love that I can get a piece of music and it's like I can reach back into history and I can pull it forward and play it just as it was played, you know, hundreds of years ago or whatever it was. It's like this visceral connection to the past that I find really thrilling as a musician, and I love being able to share that with my friends and colleagues and with the community. And as musicians, we study a lot of history. We take a lot of history classes. And when you study history, if you're paying attention, you start to realize that there's always more than one story, right? There's always more than one way to interpret the facts and interpret history. And it's really important, I think, to kind of consider that as we're looking back in history and even thinking about the history we're creating today is who is telling the story, why are they telling it, and what are they leaving out? You know, is there an agenda? Are they just forgetting things? Are they just missing things and not including things? And so that's kind of the source of where the idea for this program came from. And one of our big projects as an organization is to kind of like look beyond those dusty covers of our music history textbooks and find the composers who were left out, who weren't in our textbooks, and bring their music to the stage. And that is such a joy. We've discovered so much wonderful music, and we love sharing that as much as we can. And we also love playing music by living composers, and we love playing new music. We have a commissioning project ourselves, and that is a way of like telling the history of now, right? Like this is the history of today, is playing music that's being written today by living composers. Isn't that in a long time from now, maybe someone's gonna reach back to the music of today and say, hey, can you feel this connection to St. Louis 2023? You know, just like we're gonna go, can you feel Haydn in 1782 tonight, you know? And so I just think like having that connection is really something I love as an artist, and I love sharing that with you. So we are going to begin our concert tonight with that, with a piece of brand new music. You're about to hear a world premiere by a senior at the University of Missouri. So Isabel Borkert, would you like to come up and share with us about your piece? This piece is a commission, I think, in conjunction with the Sheldon and the Mizzou New Music Initiative, and maybe you can share a little bit about that too. So please welcome Isabel.
Introduced me. I am Isabel Borkert, and I am a senior music composition major at the University of Missouri. And I wrote this piece. I have some program notes about it that you can read, but it's basically about a time in my life I don't remember, but I think about often, and I think really resonates with a period of change that I'm in now as I graduate college and move into the real world. But yeah, I just am very thankful for a lot of people tonight. I'm thankful as Sheldon for this commission and the Chamber Project St. Louis for performing it. I'm really excited to hear it. And to Peter and Dana for being my contacts throughout this. That's been really nice, and the collaboration's been really great. As always, I'm really thankful for the Sinkfield Charitable Foundation, all they've done for me for the last 4 years, and getting this night together has been really nice. And thank you to Dr. Freund for being my professor through this and writing this with me. And then to my parents, I'm really thankful for everything you've done and for supporting me tonight and throughout my life, including the time period that this piece kind of talks about. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Isabel, for that piece and for sharing it with us. It's always a thrill to hear a piece of music for the very first time. It's one of my favorite things. And our next piece is very, very old. It has its roots in a very, very old American folk song, the folk song O Shenandoah, or sometimes called Across the Wide Missouri. So this is an old folk song of uncertain origin. There's a lot of different lyrics. There's a lot of different narratives that go along with this beautiful old song. And some are from a pioneer's perspective, looking back east, missing his Shenandoah River Valley in Virginia, or perhaps it's a Union soldier looking west, missing his home maybe in Shenandoah, Iowa. Or there are versions of this song that are sung by, enslaved people escaping to freedom, thanking the Shenandoah River for hiding their scent so that they could find freedom. So depending on who you are and where you're from, the story, the song can have a lot of different interpretations and a lot of different meanings. And composer Cindy McTee took it and reimagined it. And in a time in her life when she wanted to work with something gentle and have something gentle in her life, she turned to this old folk song to set it and make it hers and tell her story through it. And in the process of composing, she shared a draft with conductor and composer Leonard Slatkin. And he suggested, the Dvorak, the New World Symphony, the melody from that second movement, the going home, going home. Many of you know this melody. Excuse my singing, I'm not a singer. But, and so she wove that into the piece at the beginning and the end, and really taking this old American folk song and giving it her interpretation and her story. So please enjoy Shenandoah by Cindy McTee. Thank you, Cindy, for that beautiful piece. It's always a joy to have you come to our concerts. Thank you so much. So our next piece is by William Grant Still, who, in my opinion, is one of the best, most underplayed composers. And I think after you hear this piece you're about to hear, you might agree with me. He bears many accolades for breaking through as an African-American man, many of the barriers that were in place to him in the classical music industry, in the music industry during his time. And he writes beautiful, fantastic music, and so it's just a joy to share it with you. And yet, you know, a lot of times he's not really in the textbooks so much, or you don't learn very much about William Grant Still in music school, just a little bit, you know. And so it's wonderful to share his music. And this piece, I love this piece so much. It's the second movement from a larger piece, a violin sonata that he wrote that has 3 movements. And he chose for each movement an African-American artist, and he chose a specific piece of their art to link into his music. And I love that he used his platform to amplify the artwork of his colleagues. And this particular piece is Mother and Child, and if you, on our blog, on our website, I put up a picture of the artist, who is Sergeant Claude Johnson, who was a artist who was orphaned at a young age and was taken in by a family that had a lot of art connections, and he was really held up in the art, and he created for himself quite a fantastic career, mostly in San Francisco, and he worked in both 2D and 3D, he sculpted and he painted and he drew. And this particular piece is inspired by a piece that he did called Mother and Child, and you can see that is on our blog if you want to see that actual piece of art that inspired William Grant Still. It's a very moving and beautiful piece, so please welcome Kyle and Nina to the stage to play the Grant Still for you. Beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful, beautiful music. Yeah. Yay, Kyle. Yeah, I about fell over the first time I heard that. I was like, how have I never heard this? It was during the pandemic I heard it for the first time. So, as we moved to the last piece on this half, when we moved to Franz Joseph Haydn, the oldest piece of music on this program, this brings us to the 18th century. This brings us to the classical era in music. And so a tiny, tiny music history lesson for you, real quick. We have classical music, which is like the big umbrella of everything we're hearing tonight. And then within that, there's the classical era, which is this specific period of time from around 1750 to the early 1800s. And classical music isn't necessarily named after the classical era, which I'm still working out myself. So don't worry about it if it doesn't make complete sense to you. So there's other eras, of course. And the classical era is a really important time period in the history of music. A lot of things changed in the way music was written in Europe in this time period, heavily influenced by the philosophical movement, the Enlightenment, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. But the Enlightenment was this very important movement that changed the way Western cultures thought of themselves and organized their governments. This is, of course, the time of the American Revolution and the time the Constitution was written. And this is big. This is kind of a big topic here. And as musicians, we study a lot of this history, as I mentioned before. And we study it because we need to know the context in which the music was written, because it's really important to us how we interpret the music, how we perform the music. We need to know who wrote it, why they wrote it, who were the people they were writing it for, why were those people there, what were they doing, what was the culture like, what were they wearing, all that stuff comes into play of how we show up and play any historical piece. And I think it's important also if we study a document like the Constitution that was written during the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment influenced Haydn tremendously. The Enlightenment influenced the people writing, the American Revolution and writing the Constitution. And if we don't consider the context of these things and we just kind of draw them out and look at them out of their context, we're going to misinterpret them. We're going to miss things. We're going to put things in there that maybe shouldn't really be in there. So, that's a big conversation culturally right now, of course, and this, we could really go on and on about this in this program, but I won't. And I was like, I gotta be focused. And so I went to my bookshelf and I pulled out this book and I took it out backstage and there was a groan. Because this is A History of Western Music by Grout and Poliska. And I know a few of you are cringing because you may have studied this book in history class. This is a very common textbook in music schools and in conservatory. Many of us, did you have Grout and Poliska? Oh yeah, I still have mine, 4th edition. Maybe it's valuable, but I doubt it. So I looked it up. I was like, what did Grout and Poliska have to say about the Enlightenment? And when you look in the back, it says, see 18th century, which is like a chunk of this book. So I turned to the 18th century, and in the sources of classical style, they go on and on and on about the Enlightenment. I mean pages about the Enlightenment. And so, just in case you're not super familiar with the ideals of the Enlightenment, I'm just going to read a tiny bit of, I'm going to torture you maybe, a tiny bit with some Grout and Poliska. So just a few sentences, really. The Enlightenment began as a revolt of the spirit, a revolt against supernatural religion and the church, in favor of natural religion and practical morality, against metaphysics, in favor of common sense, empirical psychology, applied science, and sociology, against formality, in favor of naturalness, against authority, in favor of freedom for the individual, and against privilege, in favor of equal rights and universal education. The temper of the Enlightenment was thus secular, skeptical, empirical, practical, liberal, equalitarian, and progressive. So if you want several hundred more pages, they're right here. But you hear words, we hear a lot in America in here, right? Individual freedoms, universal education, these important tenets. And I think it's just, I love to weave together this, that this is the music that was being written in that time. And Haydn was really influenced, and this, one of the ways this came out in the style of the music is actually, the music is super, super organized in the classical period, like very organized. There's lots of repeats, you'll hear the same thing again and again, and this was their interpretation of natural. But the idea was that it is universal, and the style in Europe at this time was really consistent throughout the countries in Europe. And you know, Haydn was a mature man at this point when he wrote this music, and he was enjoying kind of traveling around and some freedom. And this was one, I think, the first thing he wrote, chamber-wise for flute, and he had had a very successful career. He was very much in his prime at this point. And this is in 1784. I just want to make the link that in 1784, the Revolutionary War ended. The Constitution was being written. It had not yet been ratified. George Washington was not yet president. And this is the music Haydn was writing in Europe. Enjoy. program, I want to thank the Sheldon for inviting us to play tonight. It's been wonderful to be here tonight. I want to thank our concert sponsor, Melanie Harvey. I want to thank the Missouri Arts Council, the Regional Arts Commission, the Trio Foundation of St. Louis, and all of our wonderful donors who have made this concert possible this evening. Thank you. So our last composer on the program is Antonin Dvorak. He was a very famous Romantic era. Remember our eras? This comes right after the classical era, the Romantic era composer, Bohemian composer, Czech composer. And he was very celebrated in Europe. And in the Romantic era, the style shifted quite a bit. And I mentioned in the classical era, Haydn, there was this idea that the music should be sort of universal, and people were all striving to sort of present the same sound no matter where they lived. And then that shifted quite a bit in the Romantic era, and it became very nationalistic. The French wanted to sound French, and the Russians had to sound Russian, and you get the idea. And Dvorak was very famous for the way he wove in Czech folk music into his, classical art music. And that's one of his defining features, is that he did that in a way that worked really, really well, and he did it a lot. And you'll definitely hear that tonight, especially in the third movement. You'll hear this folk sound in his work. And in 1892, Dvorak was invited to come to America. And he was invited to come run the National Conservatory of Music in New York. And the idea is that he would help American composers curate and figure out what was the American sound. Because American composers, it was assumed, were sort of just copying the European composers. And so he was brought here specifically with that purpose. And he traveled around. He traveled all the way into Iowa even and back. And, it was a long time ago. That's kind of a long journey back then. And, but what was really important when Dvorak was here is that at the conservatory, he met a young student, a vocalist and a composer named H.T. Burley. And H.T. Burley worked very closely with Dvorak and was actually his copyist for a time. And he sang for Dvorak hours and hours and hours of African-American spirituals and plantation songs that he had learned from his grandfather, who had been enslaved. And Dvorak he just loved it. And he encouraged Burley to write this down and turn them into art songs, which he did, and that's a whole story for a whole another concert, and which was very important in 1892. And in turn, Dvorak took the spirit of this music and wrote very famously his New World Symphony and some other pieces where he tried to incorporate this sound of the African-American music he heard from Burley. And you heard a little taste of that in the beginning of the McTee, those beautiful chords at the beginning. That's the piece that Dvorak is very famous for, the New World Symphony. And Dvorak was onto something. Dvorak felt that the American sound was inherently linked to the African-American music that he heard. And that was what was going to create this American sound. Now, it seems it took a while for the American establishment to catch on to that. Eventually, I think some of them did, and of course African-American musicians have been lifting this music up forever. And you think about that, we have, jazz, rock and roll, the blues, hip-hop, these incredible art forms, right? So Dvorak knew what he was talking about. So the piece you're going to hear tonight is written just before he came to America, actually, and it has this energy of Dvorak with the folk music incorporated into it. It's a wonderful piece. So thank you for coming tonight. I hope you enjoy the last piece on the program.
Thank you.